during the war. And I suppose I could say that the worst thing about it really wasn't the heat. It was really the fact that it was so humid. There was so much moisture in the air, so that you were always dripping with perspiration, particularly when you were working on the aircraft. And against that, of course, you always were unlucky if you got things like malaria or dengue fever or any stomach ailments at all. And most of us, at some time or other, we would be suffering from the tummy really badly. And I suppose a lot of us ended up in hospital as a result. And I ended up in hospital from the first lot of malaria when we were in the Imphal Valley, and it obviously wasn't properly cured, because 6 weeks later I was back in hospital in Imphal with malaria again. And the only good thing about that was it was a better hospital, better quality of nursing, and the Viceroy of India paid us a visit. Wavell.
All right.
He became Viceroy of India, and he came round the beds, you know, and you had to sort of lie and answer his questions as best you could. I suppose that when that happened, the squadron moved. Every time I was in hospital, the squadron moved. So I had a job to find out where they'd gone, and I have to follow on behind them and hope that somebody had remembered to take my kit bag with them and found me a bed space. But usually they came up trumps, you know, there was always a bed space for me. And after that, the MO thought probably that I'd had a bit of a pasting, so he sent me on hill leave up to Shillong, up in the hills. And the great thing about that, you didn't have to have a mosquito net. It was so cool at night, you didn't get trouble with the mosquitoes at all. Whereas otherwise you always slept under a mosquito net. Didn't do a lot of good sometimes, the mosquitoes got in there with you, but you know, it was that was okay. And I suppose we were lucky really as a squadron, because we were, apart from that time when we were in Imphal, when the road was cut and we were actually, I suppose, in siege, and the siege conditions were such that the rations were cut. First time, and the only time in the RAF that I ever felt hungry was then when we were at Imphal. The emphasis, of course, was petrol for the aircraft, ammunition, and it was the one place where we could see our planes taking off, and we could see them actually having a go at the Japs up in the hills. And there was a Hurricane Squadron, legs 11, on the same unit as us, and we actually saw them bombing Japanese positions up in the hills. You could see from the airstrip. We were a little bit too near, because the Japs actually broke in one night and they blew up some of our aircraft. At that time, the RAF regiment was responsible for guarding the perimeter. So the top brass thought they weren't doing a very good job at it. So they gave the job to the Gurkhas. And it was the one time that we ever had close contact with the Gurkhas. They were really keen, because they had a system of passwords, so that when you came from working on the airstrip to get back into camp at night, you had to give a password in order to get through the guard.
Oh, yeah.
And of course the password would only be given to the senior NCOs. Only the sergeants and above would be told what the password was, and it changed every night. And one night we were coming back on the lorry, and the sergeant had forgotten the password. And we tried cajoling and persuading, you know, Johnny, TK, we're all right, you know, no, sir, password. You had to give a password. Finally, the chap remembered what it was, and it was railway, and he was a Londoner. He said, railway! Okay, let us go in. And that was a bit of excitement, really. And then, of course, one of the excitements that we had was when we got into Burma at Tamu, which was a typical jungle airstrip. It was just absolutely cut out of the trees. In fact, the pilots would have some job in finding it unless they were very good to know to get back to land, sort of thing. This occasion, about 5 o'clock in the morning, the old hand-cranked siren went off. Everybody who wasn't working dawn patrol down on the strip had to get off into the jungle. So in the jungle they'd cut a few slit trenches, got into the slit trenches, the all clear went. So we all trooped back. Now Smithy that you mentioned, Smithy had scrambled and gone off to intercept these Jap planes who were having to go at Chittagong or somewhere like that. Smithy comes back, comes over the airstrip, does a victory roll to show that he'd got one. What he didn't know was that a Jap had followed in behind him. And as he turned to make his circuit to land, this chap came down the strip. Zero came straight down the strip. The Yanks had been working on a Mitchell bomber on the side of the strip. They'd been there for days working on the engines. This chap just gave a burst. Psst. Mitchell went up in flames. Ammunition, bang, bang, all over the place. And I thought to myself, well, Smithy's got one. It was certainly the Japs had got one, so it was evens really. It was 1-1, and that was a close one really. And that's the one time I think that you felt a bit vulnerable. You know, you felt that you were at the mercy of the bloke who was up in the air and you were on the ground. So that was fun and games, and I think that was round about November the 5th.
All right.
Yeah, because we'd got to Tamu before Christmas. We had our Christmas at Tamu, and that was a bit touch and go because they'd sent lorries back to pick up some poultry, I suppose, for the Christmas dinner, and they were late coming back, and when they came back it was dark. And one of the sergeant cooks said to us, if you want your Christmas dinner, you've got to pile to and get these chickens plucked. Well, we'd never plucked a chicken in our lives, you know, but we had to pluck these chickens in order to have the Christmas lunch. Anyway, on Christmas Eve, they decided they'd have a big do in the sing-song and booze and all the rest of it in the jungle. So they lit a big bonfire, everybody was all round, sang all the usual bawdy songs, some carols and all the rest of it. And I passed out. I wasn't used to hard liquor. I passed out. So two of them had to put me to bed. And I thought, well, this is terrible. They said, oh, you get off, go on, get off to sleep. The only plus thing was, the next morning I was one of the few people who managed to get up for breakfast, because all the others were still in slumber, sort of thing. And it was a lovely breakfast. Of course, they put on a special breakfast for us because it was Christmas morning. So we had a good lot of food for that occasion. The worst thing, of course, was being attacked at Sinthy, when that was central Burma, and that was round about February 1945. It would be round about St. Valentine's Day, I suppose, about the 14th of February, round about 14th of February. And at that time, although there were no lights on camp except hurricane lamps, we had because we were all in tents, you see. It was a tented camp, and I don't know how it came about, but I was on guard. I always used to complain that I always seemed to be on guard duty compared to the other people. I always used to think that somebody had a down on me, sticking me on guard, but on this occasion I was on guard, and it was only half a mile away where the planes were on the airstrip, dispersed around the strip. And about 1 o'clock in the morning it must have been a Jap going home, saw the lights of the camp and dropped anti-personnel bombs on the camp. It caused terrible casualties, really. And in my tent we were 6 men in a tent then. The chap who was in the next bed to me was killed outright. All the others were wounded and ended up in Chittagong in hospital. And when I got back to the tent next morning, it was in shreds, the canvas being shredded, and I was the only one there, and I'd been on guard duty. So I felt, that there was something strange about that I was complaining about guard duty.
Exactly.
And yet if I hadn't been on guard duty, I might not be telling you the tale.
Crikey.
Yeah. Only Node it was who died that night, along with, must have been 5 or 6 others who killed, and I should think about 20 ended up in hospital with wounds, with shrapnel in their back and all the rest of it. And then eventually they were patched up and came back to the squadron. When the war ended, we were at we'd been down as far south as Magway on the River Irrawaddy. When the war ended, I think we were at Camilla. No, not Camilla. No, where am I thinking of? Central Burma. Forgotten. But when the war finished, we were there, and the war finished. This is the European War I'm talking about now.
Yep.
The European War finished May, didn't it? In May 1945? No.
Yeah.
45?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, 1945. And the war finished in Europe, I think, round about 9th or 10th of May. 10th of May was my birthday. 21st birthday. And some of the blokes persuaded me that we would go into Mandalay, take a ride into Mandalay. So one of the lorry drivers obliged, and we went into Mandalay, which had been knocked about a bit. And I always remember in Mandalay we went round, there were no real shops as we know them in this country, but there was a shop which had a wind-up gramophone and a pile of old records. We looked through these old records and we found one, the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra playing The Ride of the Valkyrie by Wagner. So we put this record on and it's blasted out. And I've always remembered that when I hear it now, the tune, that comes back to me. This dusty square in Mandalay with a pie dog in the dust in front of the steps and us smoking, taking this music in. So that's one memory. And then of course when the war in the Far East finished, we were at not Camilla, where was it? Can't think of the name. Anyway, we were there when it was all over. So we got down to Rangoon eventually, and that was the big gamble that Slim was on, was getting the 14th Army down to Mandalay, down to Rangoon before the monsoon broke. Because if the monsoon weather had happened, it would probably have hampered the advance, I should imagine. So we got to Rangoon, got into barracks there, Rawlinson Barracks. The first time we'd had a roof over our head for over a year, because we'd all been in tents. Oh, and that's another thing about the tents. The tents were okay when we had them, they were new. But the combination of monsoon rain and sunshine had pretty well rotted them, so that they were leaking badly. So when we got to a place called Magway, they issued us with 2-man tents. And that's where I shared a tent with Frank Taylor, the 96-year-old that I've spoken to on the phone recently. And when we were there, the cooks had some chickens, which they got from the locals, and these were the cook's chickens. And Frank said to me, he said, "You see where those buggers roost," he said, "and when it gets dark, he said, we'll have one of those. Well, I didn't know what he was on about. Anyway, Frank goes along. All I could hear is a squawk, and Frank's got the holding the chicken. And he's got the cheek then to take it to the cooks whose chicken it was, and asked them to cook it for us, which they did. Well, Frank did this once too often, you see, and on one occasion he took the chicken along, and the cook said, "Not cooking that bloody chicken, we know it's ours. Go and get somebody else to cook the chicken for you, we're not cooking it." And I've reminded Frank a few times about that, because when he, after the war, he was a church warden up at Market Drayton. And I said to him on one occasion, what's it worth me not telling them that one of their revered church wardens used to pinch chickens into the oh dear. So anyway, we got to Rangoon, and then, and when we got to Rangoon, we thought, we might be going home then. Some hopes. Next thing they knew, they pushed us into Siam, into Bangkok. So we were on the main aerodrome in Bangkok for a while, and we always used to kid ourselves that one of these days we'll be so near the Japs, we'll be using the same airstrip as them. Well now, at Bangkok, the airstrip was, the Siamese Air Force used it, the American Air Force used it, we used it, and they had Jap planes using it. And somebody said, don't be daft, they wouldn't. Well, actually they did, because they painted the red sun out, and they painted them green, and they employed them in getting vegetables from the country, from airstrips out in the country, into Bangkok, because the people were starving. And also, they were using those vegetables to feed some of the chaps who came back to Bangkok from the Death Railway, Australians and New Zealanders, and they just stayed overnight before they flew them on to Australia and New Zealand. And some of the tales that they told us while we were at Bangkok were absolutely horrifying, the way that they'd been treated on that railway. Anyway, after Bangkok, we went then into French Indochina, into Saigon, and we were at Saigon for Christmas 1945. And it was the first time we'd seen European people from all the time that we'd been out there, really. Of course the boys got interested in the girls there, but there was a strict chaperone system, you see. One of our pals wanted to take this girl to the cinema. French films, take this girl to the cinema, and he said, the trouble is, he said, a bloody mother got to come as well. And I thought of that song, that song was, and her mother came too. So, you know, they had a strict chaperone system there. Anyway, the time came for us to leave Saigon, and they flew us back to Rangoon, and we thought, now we're going home. Instead of which, they put us on a boat. We went down to Singapore, we changed boats in Singapore, we got on an American Victory ship, the Tejas Victory, an all-welded ship, not riveted, and we sailed up to Japan, calling at Hong Kong on the way. And we landed in Japan round about March, April 1946, the Army of Occupation. Strictly no fraternisation with the natives. We were in barracks. While we were there, there was a rumour that there was a typhoon, and we had to take all the windows out and stow them underneath the beds because they thought they would blow in. It didn't come to anything. And I was there in Japan, and I was made up to corporal there in Japan until I came home from Japan in October 1946. And I was posted to Hallavington, the Empire Flying School. Now just imagine, after being out there, easy come, easy go, living in tents and all the rest of it, back onto a real bullshit station, Empire Flying School. You know, if it moves, salute it. If it doesn't move, try and pick it up. If you can't pick it up, paint it. That's the way it was. And I, of course, I was guard commander on the first occasion there, and got into trouble. Got on a charge within a week of getting there. Forfeited a day's pay, so it couldn't come soon enough for me to finish then in the RAF in July. Yeah. So then I waved goodbye to RAF and exchanged my uniform for a civvy suit, and that was it. Nearly 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when did you join up with the squadron?
Joined the squadron at Bergachi, outside Calcutta, January 1944. The squadron had only just arrived in India in the November, and within a short time of being there, they were defending Calcutta. They intercepted some Jap planes and shot some of them down, so they were soon in the action in India, having come from Italy, and having previously been in Sicily and North Africa. And that was after, of course, they'd been in the Battle of Britain. You probably have plenty of documentation of Battle of Britain, people. Yeah. So that's where I joined them. And I joined them with another wireless mechanic, Bernie Glasberg. The two of us had been together ever since the day we joined at Penarth in South Wales. We'd gone through the training procedure. We'd been up in Glasgow. We'd been down in Bolton in the colleges there, where they taught us wireless, and they sent us both out to India on the same boat, and we left the place at Bombay, Wally camp at Bombay, and got to Calcutta, and got from Calcutta on another train. Oh no, that's right, when we got to Calcutta, we went out to a little station somewhere, and they'd warned us about keeping an eye on our rifles, you know, because if you lost your rifle, you're in big trouble. And we waited there, and the station master rang somebody or other, and a lorry came and picked us up and took us to the camp where we joined 152. And then we stayed there for a while, Bergachi, only a matter of weeks, and then we went down the Arakan, and then from the Arakan back to Camilla, and from Camilla we had to fly into Imphal because the Japs had cut the road because it was a siege, and that's where Squadron did an awful lot of work in Imphal. It was continuous from dawn to dusk, and the monsoon was on as well, so it was poor flying weather for them, but they flew, and they managed to do their bit, as it were. But the pilots, you know, they really worked hard there. But there we are. Another day, another story. But Ray, of course, Ray was an armourer on the squadron.
Yeah.
And he was made up to sergeant, I think. He was corporal when I joined the squadron. He was made up to sergeant. He went down with malaria as well. And whereas when I went with malaria, they sent me up the hills. With Ray, they sent him further into India somewhere.
Yeah.
He was away about 3 weeks,
Yeah,
I think.
something like that.
Travelling was so awkward, you see, because you went to the station, there was a RTO, Railway Transport Officer, in charge at all the main railway stations. You reported to him, and then he sorted out which train you went on and all the rest of it. But invariably you ended up in a transit camp, and those transit camps were terrible. They were lousy places. Awful they were, really. The food was terrible, the accommodation was terrible, and we were always glad to see the back of a transit camp. It was far better to be travelling rather than to be in the transit camp. And of course, if you travelled from Burma back into India, it was quite a complicated business, because you went by road part of the way, you went on the river, the Brahmaputra. When you got off the river, you got on a train, so you did all forms of transport to get to your destination, because of the way in which the communications were laid out there. See, when I went to Calcutta on leave from Sindhi, after the bombing of Sindhi, I said, how do I get there? How do I get? Oh, they said, try your luck down at the airstrip. So I went down on the airstrip, and a Dakota came in, American Air Force Dakota, and the crew tossed out some rolls of Somerville tracking. That's that tracking that they lay out on paddy fields so that the planes can land and take off. And he was chewing a cigar when I went up to him, and I said, any chance of a lift? He said, sure. I said, where are you going? Chittagong, he said. So I said, oh, that'll help. Climb aboard, he said. So I just got on, and I was the only bloke in the back. The rest was all crew in the front. Landed at Chittagong, then went to the station and reported to the RTO. Got a train so far to Dimapur, then got on the river boat, then go down the river so far, get off, get on another train, and get into Calcutta. And I was in Calcutta about 2 days before my friend that you saw that photograph. He came up from Madras where he rescued, and I was there at the station to meet him, at Howrah station to meet him, with a rickshaw ready. So we had a leave together, and it was St David's Day while we were there in Calcutta. So we celebrated St David's Day, being both Welshmen. And Bob Jones, the chappie who's just died, he was also on leave in Calcutta, and we met him at the St David's Day, because he's another Welshman. So it was a very nice St David's Day dinner that we had together in Calcutta, and we saw lots of films while we were there in Calcutta. Saw the 2 cricket matches. Didn't do much shopping, didn't have much money for that, but no, we enjoyed ourselves, and then it was time to go back to the squadron. And they'd moved, of course, by the time I got back. They'd always moved while I was away. Where have they gone to? Hope somebody's got my kit bag. Yeah. There we are. That's the story.